It started with a picnic that was supposed to fix everything. A blanket on the grass, food unpacked, siblings smiling like all was fine. For once, nobody was yelling. Nobody was micromanaging. Just fresh air and forced peace. And then, one moment cracked the whole silence wide open. They were playing cricket, passing the ball around like something out of an old family photo. Jenny, who doesn't even really understand the game, jumped in to show she was part of it too. Always trying, always adjusting. But she didn't see the ball coming. It smacked her lightly, not enough to hurt, but just enough to freeze the moment. She laughed it off. That kind of laugh that isn't about comedy, it's about survival. She blamed herself. I wasn't paying attention, she said. Nobody asked her to apologize, but she did anyway. And then, the shift. She stepped onto the edge of the picnic blanket with her shoes still on. Barely a second passed before the correction came. Loud, sharp, and public. Sumit's mom didn't whisper. She didn't pull her aside. She announced it, right there like a school teacher scolding a child. Shoes off, she snapped. Not a suggestion. A command in front of the whole family. Jenny froze. Her half-smile flickered, then disappeared. She apologized again. This time, she crouched down to remove her shoes without a word. She looked like someone used to being managed, not included. And everyone else? They chuckled politely. Light laughter. Harmless, right? Cute, they said. But Jenny's face didn't laugh. Her body language screamed that she was shrinking. Sumit said nothing. Not yet. His eyes tracked everything. His mom's tone, the timing, the way his wife's face fell, the way his family stayed comfortable while Jenny got smaller. This wasn't about shoes. It was control, hiding in plain sight, and Sumit was feeling every inch of it. Jenny didn't push back. Not because she agreed, but because she's been in this dance before. She's 67 and still being treated like a teenager playing house in a space she doesn't own. She didn't want to make it worse. In public, resistance makes you the villain, especially when you're the foreign wife your in-laws never fully accepted. But you could see the pressure building behind Sumit's silence. His face tightened, his jaw clenched. And for once, no laugh, no deflection. The switch was flipping. What made this moment unforgettable wasn't the rule or the correction. It was what happened next. Sumit finally opened his mouth, and when he didn't soften anything. He didn't smooth it over or joke it away. The tone of the gathering cracked in real time. His voice cut through the air with something his family hadn't heard in a long while. Resistance. He wasn't just defending Jenny. He was confronting the history, sitting beneath every interaction, every supervision, every accidentally pointed rule that always landed exactly where his mother needed them to. What happens when the one who's always quiet finally speaks louder than control itself? What followed wasn't an explosion. It was worse. It was a soft pivot. A shift so calculated that if you blinked, you'd miss it. After barking about the shoes on the blanket, Sumit's mom didn't double down. She changed her tone. She looked around at the family and sighed, almost theatrically, about how much she missed having her sons united. How sad things were back when they were all separate. How heartbreaking it was to see her family divided. And just like that, the control switched forms, from command to nostalgia, from rules to longing, from authority to wounded mother. But it was still control. This is where it gets slippery, because if you question her harshness, she has sentiment right there to bury it. I forgive her, she'll say. I still let her stay. It sounds kind. It sounds like love. But when you look at who holds the power to grant forgiveness in the first place, it's not equality. It's a transaction. A quiet reminder that Jenny is being tolerated, not embraced. Allowed, not integrated. Jenny might not speak the language, But her body hears everything. Her shoulders slump. Her hands tighten. Her smile disappears for just a second longer than it should, before snapping back into place. That pause, that's the piece most people miss. Because this isn't about one comment. It's the accumulation. Public rules that feel like private shame. Emotional generosity that doubles as a leash. You're allowed to be here as long as you shrink. And she's been shrinking. Not with tantrums or arguments, but with obedience. Too obedient. Because defiance costs more when you're the outsider. Her age, her accent, her history. None of it protects her from the constant sense that someone's watching and writing her scorecard in real time. Sumit sees all this too, but his silence isn't apathy. It's calculation. He's watching how fast peace can be dangled and yanked. How often forgiveness becomes a tool to erase punishment without changing the pattern. And the worst part? It's working. The blanket is quiet again. The mood is lighter. Everyone went back to eating. But nothing got repaired. It just got redirected. Jenny isn't stupid. She doesn't need the words to know what's really happening. Her eyes scan their faces like reading subtitles in a scene she's somehow in, but never fully part of. Every movement, every smirk, every quick glance, she clocks all of it. And the more silent it feels, the more crowded it gets inside her head. When every rule feels small, but every moment feels watched, is it still a home or just a quiet war? It didn't start with shouting. It started with stillness. That heavy type, where the air thickens and you can feel something pressing against your chest. Sumit locked eyes with his mother and dropped every polite filter he's ever used to hold the peace. No tone softening, no mom, let's talk later, no careful threading between cultures. Nothing translated, no buffering. He just said it. And it landed like a brick wall. His voice didn't tremble, but the silence around it did. Jenny sat still, confused but alert. She couldn't catch the words, but she didn't need a dictionary. The emotional energy was burning right in front of her. She watched his mother's face shift from stiff to stunned. His brother's shoulders tightened. His sister-in-law looked down at her hands. Even the food sat untouched. Whatever Sumit had just said wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a boundary, finally spoken in the language of someone who was tired of paying for permission. He wasn't railing about tea schedules or house chores. No. Sumit went straight to the source. He told his mother what nobody else had dared to say out loud in that house, that she doesn't listen. That control doesn't start with yelling. It starts with expectations that suck the air out of every room. That her version of family unity is really just compliance dressed in tradition. And for the first time, he didn't say it to defend Jenny. He said it to defend himself. Because that picnic didn't crack just Jenny, it hit Sumit too. The moment he saw his wife being scolded like a visitor who broke a vase they were never allowed to touch, something clicked. He's been bending backward for years trying to reconcile love with loyalty. But how do you remain loyal to a system that quietly erases everyone who pushes back? His mother responded fast, not with remorse, but with dismissal. "You don't understand family," she snapped, and tucked just behind that phrase was the unspoken insult, "You don't have children." As though his failure to reproduce disqualifies him from having any voice in the rules of his own home. As though fatherhood is the only valid ticket into being heard. It wasn't just hurtful. It was strategic. A reminder of hierarchy, of order, of who decides who belongs and who's merely tolerated. That one phrase turned the disagreement into something bigger than a family spat. It was a warning. Challenge me, and I'll challenge who you are. Jenny sat there absorbing none of the words, but all the impact. Her instincts kicked in. Something in her posture shifted. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. It wasn't cultural. It was control, and its grip was tightening. Sumit wasn't just fighting for Jenny. He was fighting for the right to define his own adulthood. The fight wasn't over. It just changed locations. His mother stood up from the blanket without a word and walked off like she had pressed some invisible reset button on the gathering. Not a shout, not a meltdown, a clean walkout, like the conversation was beneath her. Sumit followed her, of course, because that's what he's always been taught to do: follow, de-escalate, pacify. Jenny stayed on the grass, not because she wanted to, but because she realized she didn't actually know where to follow him to. She looked at his sister-in-law, trying to piece together what had just happened. She didn't catch every word, but she understood the shape of the damage. Something about this one felt final, sharp, deliberate. The kind of disagreement that ends traditions, not just picnics. Back at the house, the silence stretched longer than any of them were used to. The scolding at the park opened a wound, but the unstoppable part was what came after. Sumit's mom didn't need to scream. She already knew exactly where her leverage lived. When they got home, she spelled it out. You should leave. Not a question. Not a maybe, you need space. A sentence delivered like a verdict. And just like that, the entire illusion Jenny had been hanging on to, that things were improving, that time was earning her place, buckled in one move. And here's the part that never gets filmed in romantic montages. Leaving isn't as simple as packing a bag. Because their life wasn't just tangled emotionally. It was tied up logistically, financially, professionally. Their home was her house. Their day-to-day work was family-bound. The cafe down the street wasn't just a family business. It was the family business. Their income, their security, their rhythm. Jenny suddenly saw it so clearly. They weren't living in that house. They were borrowing space in it. With rent that wasn't measured in money, but in submission. If they left now, it wouldn't just mean losing a bed or a kitchen. It would mean losing routine. Losing their ability to show up at the cafe together without tension. Losing proximity to work, to responsibilities, to any kind of basic structure. And Sumit? His own status slipped too. All those years rebuilding fragile ties with his parents after choosing Jenny, shattered again in a single afternoon. If they were out, they were out. No half and peace talks. No warm welcomes hiding behind stricter rules. His mother pulled the plug with confidence, because she knew exactly what they stood to lose. What hides underneath this whole situation is something so many people miss when they say, why don't they just move out? Because leaving a family home when your finances are still linked to that family isn't freedom. It's re-entering survival mode. And survival mode looks different in a country that wasn't originally yours. For Jenny, that meant no family back home to fall back on. No job lined up. No nest egg they could crack open to buy independence. They had a business. But they didn't own it alone. Sumit had long ago learned to balance on a tightrope of politeness and delay, saying enough to stand up for Jenny, but never loud enough to fully burn the bridge. This time, though, his mother had beat him to it. She didn't argue her way to being right. She just used her authority to erase their presence. Told them to get out, because she could. And this is the brutal truth of control in multi-generational homes that depend on shared income. Authority is not up for debate. It masquerades as care, but once tested, it sharpens into something transactional. Jenny didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat blank. She internalized the same-sized humiliation, stripped of her temporary sense of belonging. And the more she played the moment back in her head, shoes on the blanket, laughter at her expense, the forgiveness speech that followed, the more obvious it became that this wasn't a fallout. It was a calculation. Sumit returned from the conversation with his mother looking paler. Not shattered, Strategic, because here's what was happening in his head. Where would they go? How fast could they sort out housing? Could they still work at the cafe without their conversations getting filtered through passive-aggressive glances? Would his brothers still stand by them? Or would he play it safe? And the biggest question, was standing by Jenny finally costing them more than they could actually afford? You can say I'm done loud, but if the money isn't yours, someone else decides what done looks like. Jenny wasn't thinking about housing first. She was watching Sumit, watching him quietly do math in his head. Can we survive this? Can I back her and still feed us? Can I love her loudly? Or do I have to love her silently to make life livable? Love is loud in public, but dependence whispers in the background of every decision. And now, the decision wasn't about taking sides in a marriage. It was, are we about to risk losing our entire life because someone didn't like how I stepped on a blanket? When a home can collapse over a picnic, that's not housing. That's a contract with expiration dates hidden in daily routine. And the expiration just arrived. Later that night, after the silence had stretched too long and everyone had said nothing with a little too much force, Jenny ended up on the couch beside the only person in the house who didn't treat her like an outsider, Sumit's sister-in-law. The others were scattered. Sumit was still decompressing from a conversation that had somehow derailed their entire existence, and his brother had retreated, caught between blood and truth. The sister-in-law didn't say much at first, but it was the way she looked at Jenny that said more than the room had said all afternoon. Like someone who had seen this movie before. Someone who could predict the next scene before it started. And then she spoke. Soft at first. Careful, but truthful in a way that made Jenny sit up straighter. She said she knew what it felt like, being watched. Being corrected in front of the whole family like your adult status depended on your silence. Feeling like affection had strings. She'd been there. Still was, really. The difference? She'd learned to survive it quietly. Adjust. Adapt. But never forget. Jenny leaned in, and what she heard next cracked open a bigger story than she had imagined. The same comments. The same cold fronts. The same what would people say? Lectures disguised as concern. Her sister-in-law had faced it all, from tone policing to being guilted for small boundaries. Respect in this house had a price, and it always came out of the daughter-in-law's pocket. Cultural norms were one thing. These weren't norms. These were warnings dressed as values. And suddenly, Jenny wasn't the problem anymore. She was the symptom. The one who said out loud what everyone was already choreographing their lives around. Across the room, Sumit's brother overheard some of it. He didn't interrupt. But something in his face shifted too. That kind of recognition you try not to let show. Because once it's out, it changes your position entirely. He didn't deny it. Didn't roll his eyes. He swallowed hard. Like someone who had pretended for too long that peace was naturally occurring. Not actively cooperated into existence. That's the thing about families where control hides in tradition. Nobody calls it out when it only bruises one person. It's easier to let someone else take the punches, so the rest can walk quietly around the tension. But once two people speak, that's dangerous. That forces choices. That reveals structure. Jenny realized it in real time. She looked at this woman, younger than her, beaten down in a similar way, just quieter, more compliant, and understood she wasn't just fighting for her own space anymore. She was holding the line for both of them. Maybe more. Maybe others wouldn't speak up today. But they were watching. And what she did next would teach them what's allowed. The power dynamics in that home had always run vertically. Parent to child, elder to younger, accepted to tolerated. But suddenly, Jenny and her sister-in-law weren't stacked in that system. They were shoulder to shoulder. One person rebelling is noise. Two people rebelling is a signal something's about to break. The room didn't feel lighter afterward. It felt still. Still. but different. Like the moment right before a storm breaks, when everything's holding its breath. Sumit re-entered the room and looked between the two women. His wife. His brother's wife. Both affected by the same voice, the same house, the same expectations. He didn't say anything heroic. He just listened. But in that silence, something clicked louder than words. It wasn't just about choosing Jenny over his mom. It was about asking, who gets to decide the temperature of the room? Who gets to speak? Who gets corrected? And who never dares? His mother hadn't just lost her temper earlier, she had triggered a resistance, a shifting awareness. And the danger wasn't in what had been said. It was in what couldn't be taken back. Now Sumit and his brother sat in a quiet reality where their partners shared the same pain. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. A system. One that had relied for too long on everyone playing their assigned part without question. But Jenny broke that part. And now the quietest woman in the house was nodding along. And the brother? He couldn't unhear it if he tried. So the question hovering over everything now wasn't even about whether Jenny would stay. It was, how many more women in that family had tasted that control and forced themselves to fast on it? Once you realize it's not just your mirror reflecting the problem, but an entire gallery of people silently surviving it, it becomes harder to normalize, harder to excuse, harder to swallow. Now the dynamic was cracked open, and all they could do was wait to see what or who would fall through it next. It didn't take long. One moment, she was telling them to leave. The next, she was misty-eyed, talking about how much she loves her sons, how much she misses when the family was together. The edge in her voice disappeared, like someone had flipped a switch. The same woman who pushed them out with unwavering certainty was now framing herself as the heartbroken mother, aching for unity. This is the kind of emotional spin that isn't loud, it's elegant. It doesn't scream, it whispers, and it preys on loyalty, not logic. Sumit stood there, caught between two truths. The mother who enforced endless rules, and the mother now claiming it all comes from love. But love laced with guilt is still manipulation. And what she does next seals it. She says the quiet thing out loud, "You're becoming too American." That sentence didn't come from nowhere, and it doesn't mean what it seems on the surface. Translating it fully means hearing everything underneath it. You're forgetting your place. You're choosing your wife over tradition. You're embarrassing me with your independence. It wasn't about shoes on the blanket. It was about control, being challenged in public. And the only way to bring it back was to reframe tradition as sacrifice and obedience as love. Jenny heard the words, not directly, but through tone and body language. And this time, she saw it fully for what it was. Not heartbreak. Not culture clash. This wasn't about rules or even respect. It was about territory. Because if she was becoming too American, then the accusation was clear. Leave if you want to live like that. Belonging had a price tag. And the price Jenny saw now was her own space, her own voice, her own comfort. Her place in this house wasn't inherited. It was conditional. Every kind gesture was followed by a reminder. You're here because I said so. The softness in her mother-in-law's voice didn't soothe anything. It coded the same power structure in a new tone. Warm. Emotional. But still a weapon in practice. And Jenny? She stopped mistaking it for peace. If love comes laced with conditions, how do you ever know you're safe? For the first time, she wasn't just mad. She felt something deeper. Certainty. That wordless moment when a long-held hope quietly dissolves. She'd been waiting for acceptance for 6 years. But now she was seeing it plain. The house would never hold her as an equal. The affection would always dangle just out of reach, and every moment of calm would always be rented, never owned. There's a certain kind of sentence that doesn't need to be screamed to land like a slap. His mother looked straight at him and said it, calm, clear, and cold. You don't understand family. 4 words, perfectly loaded. To anyone outside, it might sound like frustration, but Sumit knew exactly what it meant. That line wasn't random. It was specific, calculated. It meant, you don't have children, so your opinion doesn't count. It meant, your experience is incomplete. You don't get to define boundaries because you haven't lived the version of life I respect. And, more than anything, it meant, you don't get to fight me. It was the ultimate disqualification. She wasn't arguing with his logic. She was undermining his right to speak on family at all. His adulthood? Invalid. His marriage? Fragile. His status? Temporary. Jenny watched it unfold with an expression that barely moved. But inside, something was shifting for good. Because this wasn't about a picnic. It wasn't about shoes or blankets or cricket balls. That was surface noise. The real message had been delivered now. Jenny's place in the house had never been secure. Her acceptance wasn't permanent. It was a favor, one that could be revoked the moment she stepped outside the box drawn for her. And Sumit? He was right back in the middle, pulled between 2 impossible identities. Husband or son? Protector or peacekeeper? He had tried so hard to live somewhere in between. But middle ground doesn't survive in a storm. At some point, you either hold the boundary or lose the person who needed it. His silence wasn't neutral anymore. It was participation. And Jenny could see it. She didn't need language, not now. She could read it all. His hesitation, the stolen glances, the subtle deferrals. Sumit was still trying to save the whole structure, but the foundation had already cracked. And Jenny? She had crossed into something else. She wasn't debating anymore. She was observing, calculating, quietly confirming what she already feared. She wasn't just unwelcome when she made mistakes. She was unacceptable the moment she acted like she belonged. When someone starts planning around you instead of with you, your control is already gone. She wasn't plotting revenge. She was preparing escape. And the saddest part wasn't that she felt pushed out. It was that this time, she wasn't even surprised. The next morning wasn't loud. It was just heavy. The kind of silence where you know nothing's fixed, but everyone's pretending yesterday disappeared. Breakfast was made, coffee poured. The kitchen smelled like normalcy. But the conversations had been reset to one-word replies and forced glances. It felt like a family in costume doing the performance, but no one buying their own act. Jenny sat at the table, but it didn't feel like hers. She didn't touch much on her plate. Her appetite had vanished, along with her belief that this place would ever fully welcome her. Across the room, Sumit's mother moved with the confidence of someone who believed the collapse had already happened, and she was still standing. No apology, no talk of fixing things. She didn't need to rebuild anything, because to her, nothing had snapped. Jenny was the disturbance, not the damage. But underneath that surface play of calm, a different fear had started to crawl in. Not emotional, logistical. Because meals weren't the only thing this house provided. This family wasn't just her home, it was her work, her routine, her financial spine. The family cafe down the street had always seemed like neutral ground. Everyone helped. Everyone pitched in. But now? Nothing felt neutral. Being told to leave wasn't just a house eviction. It meant possibly being squeezed out of the business too. And nothing kills a workflow faster than emotional tension turning into professional isolation. What Jenny started to notice was as quiet as the shift that happened after the shoes on the blanket moment. But it was more strategic. Schedules didn't include her name anymore. Conversations about daily tasks didn't loop her in. Phone calls got taken away from the shared table. No one said she was cut out, but suddenly she had to ask twice about everything. Things she used to do automatically now required double-checking. It was all still hers, technically. But she could feel them phasing her out with soft smiles and logistics. And that's how control hides, not through screaming matches, but with whispered recalibrations. Emotional safety goes first. Then predictability. Then professional relevance. Until one morning, you stop recognizing the version of your life that still looks the same, but doesn't answer to your choices anymore. Sumit saw it too. Not instantly, but gradually. He noticed her being left off the planning calls. He noticed her being accidentally not informed about orders. He noticed questions about staffing being discussed in rooms Jenny wasn't in. And instead of arguing, she'd just nod carefully, as if asking would make everything worse. Trust didn't explode. It just leaked. Day by day, task by task. The woman he married was becoming a quiet outsider in every part of their shared life. And when partnership starts to feel like employment, you know the foundation isn't love anymore. It's cooperation paper thinly painted to look like unity. At night, they barely touched. Not because the love was gone, but because closeness started to feel unsafe when neither of them knew what tomorrow would take away. Jenny stopped reaching for comfort. Sumit stopped offering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. They operated like roommates with collateral. Clothes folded, dishes done, schedules exchanged, without emotion. This wasn't collapse. It was erosion. And the cost wasn't just personal. It was economic. They had limited money. Moving out wasn't as easy as walking away and signing a lease. In India, housing for foreign nationals isn't as simple as Craigslist and PayPal. And starting their own cafe? That wasn't an idea. It was a question of time, licensure, money, location, legal protection, and trust. Not to mention the social backlash that could erase their customer base if the community sided with the family name instead. All of it was one pressure system. Home, income, food, future, all connected to people who now saw Jenny as a disturbance. And here's where emotional boundaries hit practical gridlock. Jenny could feel the resentment closing around her, but the logistics made it impossible to breathe on her own. She was still showing up, still putting in effort, still saying good morning. But inside, she was detaching. Because how do you depend on someone who can always hold your survival over your head? Even doing nothing had become a trap. If they stayed, things stayed ugly. But if they left, everything that gave their days rhythm fell apart. And that question, rebuild everything or live halfway, every day, hung in every corner of the house. You can fake peace, but you can't fake safety. And she stopped feeling safe a long time ago. Yet no one moved. Not Jenny, not Sumit, not even the family, who acted like the conflict had burned itself out. On the surface, it looked like normalcy had returned. Downstairs smells like cardamom and toast. Orders for the cafe came in. Shift lists were updated. Business was functioning. But everyone was walking on floors that could cave in at any second. Because leaving a family is one risk. But building without them? That's a whole other mountain. By the time another week passed, nothing had visibly exploded. But that's the trick with cycles. They survive not because people agree. They survive because people adapt. And Jenny had done a lot of adapting over the last 6 years. Every time she was shut out, she told herself it was temporary. Things would shift. Emotions would cool. Maybe once they lived under the same roof, they'd find peace that phone calls and visits never could. But now, things were clearer than ever. This wasn't culture shock or family tension. This was a system. One built to stay in power by keeping everyone else unsure of their place in it. She wasn't waiting for change anymore. She was studying the rhythm. The way offense turns into guilt. The way resistance gets softened by nostalgia. And the way attention swerves every time real decisions get too close. Sumit had danced this choreography longer than Jenny had even known him. He wasn't trying to ruin their relationship by staying quiet. He was trying to make it livable. Except what Jenny now understood is that livable isn't the same as fair. And compromise without balance always tips toward resentment. He still spent most of his energy trying to diffuse, smoothing things over with his mom, offering Jenny small reassurances, a new plan, a postponed conversation. Nothing permanent, just enough to breathe. But small repairs don't fix structural damage, they just delay the collapse. Jenny could feel it now, with every look, every silence. Her trust, the thing she'd given freely for so long, was no longer unconditional. She wasn't pulling away because she stopped loving him. She was pulling away because she needed clarity. And all he could offer was delay. Even in quiet, they both knew something had shifted. They didn't argue. They didn't cry. But when love becomes quiet for too long, doubt moves in. And doubt is louder than people think. She would lie awake at night and ask herself things she never asked before. Not do I love him? Because that never changed. But can I love him here? Was a different question. And worse, can he love me without them telling him how? That one stayed on loop in her head. The truth was brutal. This wasn't the first time the family had tried to shrink their marriage into something manageable. And it wasn't the first time Sumit had tried to hold both sides. But now there was distance between him and Jenny that hadn't existed before. Not because he hurt her, but because he hadn't protected her. And trust doesn't always break with betrayal. Sometimes it breaks with inaction. Eventually, he noticed a change too. She was quieter, but not in the way she used to be after a fight. This was measured, resigned. A woman making her own mental exit plan. She still said I'm okay, but stopped asking for shared decisions. She started thinking in individual steps. Because relationships don't always break loudly. Sometimes one person just starts walking faster. And in the chaos of the past month, that's what shifted most. Jenny wasn't expecting things to change anymore. She was asking herself what it would cost to stop participating in a system designed to keep her small. Because maybe the family would never change. Maybe Sumit's mother would always hold power like a chess master reshuffling the board whenever someone got too close. Maybe Sumit's brother would always stay out of it. Maybe forgiveness would be offered like a conditional coupon, expire soon, and only valid if redeemed with obedience. And that part hurt. But what hurt more was knowing that they had given 6 years, 6 full years, trying to earn a seat at a table that asked them to stop looking like themselves to be served. Now, Jenny wasn't waiting for her name to be called anymore. She was deciding whether she even wanted to stay in the restaurant. When staying becomes survival, leaving might finally become love. In the end, the house didn't crumble, the cafe didn't close, the family didn't renounce them in public. And yet, everything had changed. Not because the situation got louder, but because Jenny got quieter in a way that holds power, not fear. And maybe, for the first time, that power was hers alone. The final question wasn't whether the family would heal. They might, eventually. But the question that mattered more was whether Sumit and Jenny were willing to stop surviving love and finally start choosing it, even if it meant disconnecting from everything they'd worked to keep. Because maintenance isn't the same as peace, and being tolerated isn't the same as being held. Some people marry into support, others marry into politics. But eventually, every couple hits the moment where they have to ask, is this really home? Or just a house we're renting with our silence? And Jenny? She's ready to stop paying. And just wait until the next couple steps into this trap, where love takes a backseat to the paycheck and loyalty becomes a job description.